Welcome to the Free Library. I'm David Bookspan. I'm a recidivist startup guy and a proud pepper. This evening's event is part of the Free Library's Leading Voices series, which features great conversations with top minds in business and inspires us all to become better leaders in the workplace and better people in our lives. Thanks to Friedman LLP, who is the generous sponsor for these events. I'm privileged to introduce tonight's guest speaker, Mo Gawdat, who was Chief Business Officer at Google X, which is also known as the Moonshot Labs. Mo is going to be in conversation with Tracey Matisak. Mo opened Google's offices in over 50 countries. He is passionate about emerging markets and using technology to empower these communities. In 2001, after the tragic loss of his 22-year-old son through a series of medical mistakes, Mo dedicated his immense curiosity to studying happiness. Mo approached happiness as a scientific challenge, ultimately leading up to an algorithm for happiness. Mo was determined to help as many people as possible become happier. We were talking just a little while ago about a goal which he set of making 10 million people happy. His new book, Solve for Happiness, Engineering Your Path to Joy, maps out this journey for lifelong contentment. Google co-founder Sergey Brin calls it a powerful personal story woven with a rich analysis of what we all seek in a way we can act upon it. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mo Gawdat and Tracey Matisak to the Free Library.
Welcome to Philadelphia.
Thank you so much.
So, Mo, you have had, by any standard, an incredibly successful career with Microsoft, with IBM, with Google, and yet something compelled you to undertake a study of happiness, an in-depth study of happiness. What prompted you to do that?
Well, career is irrelevant, to be honest. Success is irrelevant. I found in my early life, as a successful businessman, as a day trader, and someone who may have achieved most of what we work most of our lives for, that the more that life blessed me with good fortune, the more unhappy I became. In a very interesting way, I was given every toy a successful businessman would think about, cars and travel and gratification of every sort. I was given an incredible gift in my wonderful family, and the more life gave me, the more unhappy I became, until I think there was a point back in 2000, 2001 when if I had been diagnosed, I would have definitely been considered clinically depressed.
How do you explain that paradox, to have so much, right? Most people would look at your life and say, you have wealth, you have a family, you have a fulfilling career. How can you be miserable with all of those blessings?
Have you ever gone searching for your keys when they've been in your pocket all along? Yeah, those of you with glasses know exactly what I'm talking about. You just, you just look for them everywhere, and you shout, asking where they are, and you take things off the desk and dive under the sofa, and you never find your keys or your glasses because they've always been with you. And this is exactly what the truth is about happiness. We are all born happy, right? If you look at any child, if they're fed, if they're safe, if they're loved, if there is no reason for them to be unhappy, their default setting is happy, right? And so, and that doesn't only apply for little children, it applies to you too. I mean, think about the time when your boss was not annoying, when your life was easy and there was no reason to be unhappy. What was your state? You were calm, you were peaceful, you were happy, right? Mm-hmm. So happiness is inside us, and when we search for it outside us, regardless of how hard you try, you're never going to find it. And that was exactly my case.
So you got away from what you call in the book the factory settings, right? We start out happy, that's our default state, but then kind of like a new iPad out of the box.
Absolutely.
Right? But then we add apps to it, things happen, and that begins to impact
Yeah,
whenever it
I'm
happens.
not allowed to comment on iPads as a Google employee, but let's let's just talk about Android.
The new Google phone, the new,
You get that Android phone, and you get it out of the box, and it's working perfectly well, right? Right, and you swipe through, and it's very smooth, and the battery lasts a full day, at least the first day, right? And then you start installing weird apps on it. Right, you install an app that constantly pings the network, or is constantly using your GPS, and what happens to your battery life? It drops. It goes down to 4 hours, and you have to recharge two or three times a day. Right, you change the language interface to Vietnamese, and boom, you're gone. Right, and that's exactly, truly what happens to us. We come out to life with a very interesting setting. We observe life. Without the use of words, and accordingly without the use of thoughts, as we are trained to comprehend the world as we are now, right? And once you start to generate, to use those building blocks for trying to make sense of the world, the rest of life follows. You start to build an identity, and accordingly an ego. You start to completely believe in your thoughts. You start to develop so many skills that make you successful in life, make no mistake, but at the same time make you miserable. And that's exactly what we do. Now, the real interesting question is this: when your Android phone misbehaves, what do? Do you install more apps to it? Do you add stuff to it? You don't. What do? You reset. You remove all of the additions that you added to it that got it to where it is. And that's exactly what I try to say in Solve for Happy. Remove the apps, remove the unhappiness, and then what's left behind is your default setting, is your childlike happy self.
So how did you go about doing that in your life?
Yeah. So I say that with respect, because happiness is not a new science, right? We all know that, and I'm sure some of you who are interested in the topic meditate regularly, or practice yoga or mindfulness and so on, and all of those work, right? These are as old a science and a technology as maybe even earlier than the pyramids, but they work, right? They just didn't work for me. Let's put it this way: at the beginning, when I started to search for my happiness, as an engineer, my brain is wired differently. So if you tell me what to do, and you tell me why I'm not, and you don't tell me why I'm doing it, I just don't get it, right? If you and as an executive, I even had a bigger bug. If you tell me what to do, I'll say no. It's simple as that, right? And so for me, it was a big struggle, because in the first 2.5 years, I literally couldn't get it. I read everything I could get on the topic of happiness, and I just could not find my happiness. And then I started to change the approach to an approach that I could relate to. I did it like an engineer would. I defined the problem statement super accurately. What is happiness? What is it that we're searching for? What's the target? How do we measure it, right? Is there an algorithm behind it? Because that's what we do. Software developers, we have an equation that the computer can follow over and over and over, right? And I was looking for that. I know it sounds crazy now, but it actually sort of drove me to where I am now. I was looking for those, if you think of this as your operating system, I was looking for that 20 lines of code that you can run every time you feel unhappy, and they will just do the job. They will just do the resettings of everything that went wrong, right? And I found them, surprisingly. At least for my brain, I found them. So, around 9 years later, it would be hard to disturb my happiness, really, to disrupt my happiness. I found a way where, when things went wrong, I could simply tell myself, think through it this way, and you will find no reason to be unhappy.
Well, two things. How do you define happiness? And then, how did you solve for happiness? What did you come up with?
How do you define happiness? I mean, does anyone know what happiness is? It's really interesting, right? So it's that feeling that we all search for, and none of us really knows what we're searching for. I mean, I've turned Solve for Happy into a training, and I spoke to thousands of people, and every time I say, what is happiness? They go like, right? And so what I did, I refer to that in the first chapter of the book, is I literally started to collect as many arbitrary data points as I could, right? I had no equation to describe happiness. So I basically said, okay, let's find out every moment in my life whenever I felt happy, okay? Write them down, and literally like you do on an equation, you plot them on a chart and you try to find that line that fits amongst, between all of them. And that line becomes your happiness equation. And so, there are many ways you can, many ways where many people will agree. I feel happy when I'm petting my dog, or I feel happy when I'm looking at my daughter, or I feel happy when I'm having a good cup of coffee. We could agree to that, but it's not the universal definition of happiness. What I found was the only common definition of happiness was this. You feel happy when the events of your life, or at least the way you think about the events of your life, seem to be meeting your expectation of how life should behave, okay? Now, I'll give you that in an equation format, because then it becomes super clear. So you could simply say happiness is equal to or greater than the difference between the way you look at the events of your life and your expectation of how life should behave. If the events of your life seem to be better than how you wanted life to behave, you're happy. If they're not, you're unhappy. And that's it, really. Every moment in your life you felt unhappy, it's because life missed your expectations. Even though, by the way, sometimes life rightfully missed your expectations, yet you still felt unhappy. So your team may have played miserably bad, right? And lost. Yeah, they should lose. I mean, the logical thing is they played bad, so they should lose. Yet, no. If that happens, I'm unhappy. Life misses my expectations.
Well, we see that every Sunday during football season, right?
That's the other thing I'm never allowed to comment on.
So I think you've said two things that are hugely important. One is about expectations, that obviously our level of happiness is related to our level of expectation, but also our perception of things and the
Absolutely.
way that we think about the events in our lives are critically important in terms of our level of happiness.
Absolutely. So let's cover those two, but let's start with the latter. So, there is ample research that will tell you that if I know everything, like 90% of what's going on in your life, I can only predict 10% of your happiness, right? The reason is because it's not what's happening in your life that makes you happy or unhappy. It is the way you think about it that makes you happy or unhappy. I always use an interesting example. In my days of trying to find my happiness, I had this wonderful convertible car that I really, really loved. And my wife, Nibel, took it out, and she had a head-on collision with a truck, right? But the car was, all of the safety features deployed exactly as you want them to, and so the car was completely wrecked. You could not recognize it, but my wife was safe, right? And how did I feel? I felt happy. Now, think about that event, right? The event met my expectation because my wife is safe even though the car is a wreck. Now, think about it differently. What if my wife had taken that car, parked it on the side, and then went in to buy a drink or something, and a truck hit it head on and the car was a wreck? The event would be exactly the same, right? My wife would still be safe, and my car would still be a wreck, and I would feel miserable. Like how do you wreck my toy, and I love my toy, and life shouldn't do this to me, right? It's the way we think about the events. It's not the events themselves. I mean, we could do a ton of experiments together now, or I can show you that the minute you change the way you think about life, the minute you change it, the unhappiness goes away. It's as simple as that.
So it's possible then to rewire our brains, in a sense.
You don't even need to rewire them. Look at us now. You've instructed your brain for the last 10, 15 minutes to focus on my words. What did your brain do? It focused on my words. It's as simple as that. I mean, when was the last time you told your brain to raise your left arm and your brain goes like, nah. See, seriously, every time you will tell your brain to raise your left arm, it will raise your left arm. If you tell your brain to, check the color of the curtain behind me, can you guys please do that for me? It will do it. The only time where, Your brain will obey every time you behave like the boss, right? The problem is when unhappiness starts to, or suffering as I call it, suffering is repeated unhappiness. When suffering, sets in, your brain goes like, you know what? This is a situation that requires me being the boss. I'm just going to sit here, bring the thought over and over and over in your head and torture you with it. And by the way, don't say no, I'm the boss. You know what? No, I am the boss. Seriously, brain, if you're thinking a thought that has no impact on the real world, and the only impact it brings is to make me miserable, I'm sorry, go get me a better thought, right?
Well, and it reminds me of the saying that pain is inevitable, suffering is optional.
Absolutely.
Right.
And that's actually, so this was how I found that part of my model. So if you compare those two human conditions, it's actually so eye-opening, because you cut your finger and there is a survival mechanism that will take your hand away from the knife, right? You will feel the pain so that you keep it away from hitting a chair or putting it under hot water. You're protecting yourself. It's very important. And even though we dislike pain, it's useful. We wouldn't want to live without pain because the species wouldn't survive without those alert signals, right? And emotional pain is the same. So emotional pain is, I make a rude comment to someone as wonderful as you, and then a minute later I go and say, oh man, why did you do that? I feel regret. And so I come and apologize. That's good. That's good pain. But that is the instant of pain. Suffering is when I take that and I start to tell myself weird thoughts over and over in that incessant thought process, just to torture myself without even coming to apologize, right? So, I would go back and I say, why did you do that? She's so nice. You're such an idiot. I hate you, Mo. You always do that to yourself. Everyone hates you. You should, lie down and die. I mean, why are you doing this to me, brain? Seriously. Like, you know what? Come up, and here's the interesting bit. I know I'm talking a little too much about this, but this is so interesting. This incessant thought happens in one part of our brain that I call useless thought, right? It is very different than useful thought. Useful thought happens on the right-hand side of your brain. It is insightful thinking and experiential thinking. Insightful is when you're solving a problem, and experiential is when you're experiencing the world as it is. This is true science, proven with MRI, right? Now, when you let your brain take over and just live in that incessant thought, midline areas of your brain, it is not solving the problem. It's just making you feel miserable. Now, if you're, like me, a businessman, and, let's say, someone is rude to me before I walk into a meeting, and the meeting is important, and there are numbers that I need to review, right? The minute I will get into the meeting, my brain will go like, he was rude, oh, what's that number, right? And then it will start to experience the real world, and then it will start to solve problems. And once I do that, the feeling of unhappiness goes away. I don't think about the rude driver anymore. And the interesting question is, even if I did, it wouldn't change a thing. The person that was rude was already rude. I may never meet him again my whole life. And there is no point thinking about it. But we let our brains be the boss.
Well, and I thought it was fascinating when you talk about some of the illusions, thought being one of them, and you make the point that we are not our thoughts, and yet we often have difficulty distinguishing between the two, and we buy into the idea that we are the sum of our thoughts.
Yeah, it's, to me, I think, probably the biggest tax we've paid as civilization, to be honest. I mean, so definitely thought, useful thought, is what propelled our civilization forward, right? The reason we could invent iPhones and Android phones is because, we can think, we can plan, we can analyze, right? We can create logic and create a process and, follow it. But to glorify that to the point where you start to believe that I think, therefore I am, that's an utter pile of, what, right? Truly, the true statement is, your brain is just a biological function, like your lungs, like your heart. It's just, it is there for your survival. It makes sense of the world around you through sensory information, and then coordinates your muscle responses and your movement and your actions to make sure you're safe. And so in reality, the true statement is not I think, therefore I am. The true statement is I am, therefore my brain thinks. That's it, right? And once you make that distinction, everything becomes clear, because you know what? You no longer have to obey. It's like, you know what? Your brain is just a game theorist, right? If every situation it will be presented, it will give you as many scenarios as possible for that situation. So someone would send me an annoying email, and my brain will go like, respond aggressively, respond rudely, kill them, or right? It will just offer me every possible idea. And it's truly up to me to say, oh, thank you, brain, that's really insightful of you. I just don't want to kill anybody. Can you come up with a better thought? Okay? It's as simple as that, really. And to take that control, first you don't have to obey. And the more important thing, you don't have to associate. You understand? There is a huge difference between the thing talking in my head. By the way, anyone here who doesn't have someone talking in their head? How many have many talking in their heads? Right? Yeah, to start telling yourself, I'm not crazy, that there are so many thoughts happening in my head, that's an incredible freedom, right? Suddenly, when my brain starts to annoy me, I know it sounds very difficult, but there are simple techniques where you can simply say, sorry brain, very bad idea. I mean, I've practiced that as an executive, believe it or not. So, I would get amazing Googlers, very smart people who have been working on a project for 2-3 weeks, and they come with a presentation and they show me the slides, and 20 minutes in, I will say, good work, guys. I'd appreciate if you go back and do a little more work on this, okay? No one gets offended. They go back, they do a little bit of work. They come back a week later, and I say, oh, that's much better. Can you please fix that section now? And within 2 weeks, we have an incredible piece of work. Do that with your brain, right? It's like, okay, Mo, I'm going to torture you for the next half an hour. Seriously, go back and do better than that, right? It's doable.
Your formula for happiness was put to the ultimate test in 2014. Tell us about Ali and what happened, and how your work in studying happiness got you through that incredibly difficult time.
Yeah. Well, Ali, my son, was I think the kindest, most remarkable man I've ever met. I actually, came to that realization completely within the last few months, now that I thought so much about him, that I've never met a man like Ali. And he was not only my son, he was my son and my best friend. I had him at a very young age. I was 24, maybe 25 at the time. So we played video games together, we played music together. He was my best friend, and he was super wise. And he was so, he didn't speak much, but when he spoke, you'd better listen. He was very happy all the time, and actually helped me tremendously on the happiness model. And unfortunately, or fortunately, we'll never know, in 2014, Ali was diagnosed with an appendix inflammation and, prescribed an appendectomy, which is a very simple operation. We weren't worried at all, and mistake after mistake, within 4 hours, we realized he was no longer going to stay with us. They say that losing a child is the hardest thing you'll ever experience. I'd subscribe to that. It never goes away. It truly never goes away. I mean, Ali's been gone almost 3 years now. There is a part of my heart that's missing. I actually have been struggling to find the words. But that's the pain. Understand that, right? That's the pain. So the pain will be there. It's, I love him, I miss him, I would wish for another hug. That's the pain. The suffering is if I had allowed myself to go into, you should have never driven him to that hospital, you should have gotten a second opinion, you're the one that killed him, how can you live without him, life will never go on. And you know what? All of that is lies. The truth is, I wanted him to be safe. I wanted his pain to go away. This was the closest hospital to our home, and appendectomy is not that, threatening as an operation, and so on, right? So we were okay when Ali left, which is surprising. Don't get me wrong. We were not happy in the definition of jumping up and down in joy, okay? But we were at peace. When you really dig deep into happiness, happiness is that peaceful, calm feeling of being okay with the world. Events meet expectations. And so when I realized that somehow the model was working, I realized that wouldn't it be, I thought that it would be so much better, wouldn't you think, if instead of closing my door and decaying for the rest of my life, I would try to do something out of Ali's loss. So my friends started to say, the fact that you're this peaceful is actually worthy of noting. So, and the family, my daughter and Nibel, his mother, and so everyone urged me to write it down. And so I set myself a mission. You're aware of that, as a businessman, I said, wouldn't it be amazing if I can turn this into happiness, have 10 million people learn Ali's way of living, and, maybe send him a happy wish and wish that he's happy where he is right now. And it wouldn't bring him back, understand that. So once again, don't be fooled. What I'm doing is not going to bring Ali back, but wouldn't it be a slightly better world if that was the case? So Ali's departure, I think, is what triggered me to write. The model has been, I think, developed with him because of the way he viewed life. And Ali had an interesting tattoo on his back that read, "The gravity of the battle means nothing to those at peace," which in a very interesting way almost sums it all. If you can find that peace in your head, every battle is manageable.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about how, in the moment, how you and your family processed that? I mean, you talked about how you made the decision that I'm not going to go down that road and torture myself with needless suffering. But that was, as you said, you can't think of too many things more difficult than losing a child. How did you and your wife and daughter process that?
So I think the most eye-opening moment was around 8 hours after Ali left, when I received calls asking if we would allow an autopsy on Ali's body. And I looked at Nibel at the time, and Nibel said what I think was miraculous of a mother's heart to come up with something like this. She said, "Will it bring Ali back?" Right? So they were saying, we'll do an autopsy, we'll come to the bottom of it, and we were going to, just take the corrective actions and so on. And, Nibel said, "Will it bring Ali back?" And that kind of realization, our inability to avoid the pain or harsh experiences in life, truly is the starting point of a turning point. When you realize that there are things you can do to make the world a little better, but there are sometimes things that you can do nothing about, right? And when you see those, you get into what a concept that I really cherish in the book that I call committed acceptance. And with committed acceptance, what you do is you say, okay, so this is in my area of concern. I can do nothing about it. I can hit my head against the wall for the next 4.5 years, and nothing will change. So I accept the world as it is. Now let me commit and see how I can turn this into something that's a little bit better. I had several conversations with so many interesting people afterwards, which was shocking, really. When you lose a loved one, you start to get all of those who lost loved ones to approach you. And you'll be surprised how many walk amongst us who had a story of loss that is as harsh or harsher than losing Ali. It's in a video gamer's mind. I used to play a lot of video games with Ali. In a video gamer's mind, it's just the way the game is played. We all come here to live, and then we all leave someday. You can complain about the rules of the game for the rest of your life. that won't change a thing. The game is played that way. So you might as well be the best player at it.
What do you think Ali would say about the work that you're doing now in sharing what you've learned about happiness?
What do you think I will say when I meet him? Yeah, because he left early, so he's gonna get that spank, and then and then the hug. Of course, you know, there's nothing I want more than to see him proud. He actually asked me to work on something that changes the world, depending on my heart a little more. Believe it or not, 2 days before he left, he sort of almost dictated his will, if you want. So I wish he's proud, but more importantly, I wish he's happy. And you know, I wish that he knows how much we all, and so many other people now love him, I think. Yeah.
Is there a difference between happiness and joy?
Oh yeah. Can I expand on that question?
Absolutely.
Right. So there is a difference between happiness and joy, but there is also a difference between happiness and fun, which I think is the most poisonous part of the modern culture, right? So we have mixed up happiness and fun in a way that makes us search for happiness in all the wrong places, right? So we think that if we go to a party that this is happiness, or you know, if we go dancing or blast music, this is happiness. Interestingly, I call this the state of escape. It's not the state of happiness. The state of escape is engaging your body, your physical form, in activities, pleasurable or not, by the way, that would stop you thinking. It would just suspend your thought long enough to get back to that childlike state of no thought, and the default setting is happy, right? The problem with, and by the way, nothing's wrong with fun. Huh? The problem with fun is that in the modern world, we started to use it like a painkiller, right? So, every time you feel unhappy, thoughts are attacking you. Instead of fixing the issue and really taking charge, you pop a pill. You go blast some music, and for 3 songs, you're happy, right? The problem is when the music stops, you're back to thoughts in your head, and you're back to unhappiness. So you pop a stronger pill, and a stronger pill, right? So some of us will go work out, it will work for a week, and then the thoughts continue, so you go to extreme sports, right? Some of us will even go to real drugs, just to suspend that thought process. And one of the biggest things about finding your happiness is to realize that fun used as a painkiller is never going to give you happiness. It's just going to slow the pain for a while and keep the reason for your unhappiness in there. The other side of it is above happiness. Happiness is that process that happens when you solve the happiness equation. So you compare the events of your life to your expectations, and you end up realizing that, life is okay. Thank you, life, right? So I'm happy. If you do that often enough, you start to realize that life is mostly okay. Okay? I know it sounds hard when you're stuck in traffic, or when it rains in a day where you want to be in the park, but seriously? I mean, you want to know what harsh is? We're the luckiest 1% of everyone who's ever lived, right? There are so many people in the world, I always quote Louis C.K. in one of his sketches, Sometimes we invent problems to feel unhappy about, In some parts of the world, the problem of today is, well, they're going to cut off all of our heads today, right? That's a real problem. Mm-hmm. Now, choosing a language on the ATM interface, not much of a problem, right? So the truth is, when you start to solve the happiness equation frequently enough, you start to realize that most of the time you don't actually need to solve it at all. That most of the time, life, even the harsh parts of life, should meet your expectations if your expectations are realistic enough. And so when you get to that state, you start to realize that if you see the truth, you can be in a state of almost uninterrupted happiness, or most of what happens around you is not important anymore. And I'm sure you have a few friends who have been blessed with this. Someone's rude to them, they smile, and they go on. You know, the words will evaporate in midair, and that's it. You know, they don't care much about it. They're never going to meet that person again. They don't think of it as, oh, I've been insulted. He doesn't even know me, so even if he insults me, he's insulting someone else, right? And if you rise above the clutter of thought, that's when you reach that state that I call the state of joy. You don't think too much about the issues that are irrelevant. And when you think in a useful way, right, rather than an incessant way.
Well, we are almost to the point of opening the floor for questions from our audience, but I do want to ask you, before we turn it over to the audience, what can you tell us about Google X? Can you share anything that you're working on right now, or give us a peek into what's going on there?
I can tell you everything, but I'm going to have to flash you, like the Men in Black afterwards. I can tell you it's an incredible place where we start with looking at problems that affect millions or billions of people and try to make the world a better place through technology. And it's a fascinating mission with so many talented geniuses that are working on it. So, wishes that we succeed. I think our world would be better the more we succeed.
You work on moonshots.
Moonshots,
right?
yeah. Like making 10 million people happy. Yeah.
I've been a clinical psychologist for 40 years. I agree with you. I don't think there's anything worse than losing a child. And I'm sorry for your loss. But I'm just really curious, listening to you, how is what you're saying any different than what Beck's cognitive behavioral therapy and Albert Ellis's rational motive therapy have been saying for 50 years, that your thoughts control how you feel?
Yeah, it's not different at all. It's as I said, the science of happiness has been around since humanity began. So we say it in different ways, in different ages, to different people. So there was a point in time where the technology invented to understand happiness and understand peace would be yoga, right? And in an interesting way, at the time that was psychology, if you want, or whatever the science of the time. Our world today is filled with people who are looking for, I call them the modern day winners. These are people that engage in life every day in a language and in a way that is very different than what we've always done, okay? And so I try to talk in a language that is exactly what today's modern day winners speak, okay? This is one side. The other side truly is, if you look at Solve for Happy, I felt that most of the time people will take a slice of the happiness challenge and solve it, right? So meditation would manage to stop your brain for a while, for example, right? And yes, of course, if you can do that, you would feel happier. The more you do it, the happier you become. It doesn't fix several other issues that are around, around your challenge, people's challenges with happiness. So in my model, which tends to be both a compliment and a complaint that I get all the time, it is like engineering models are. It's actually, super comprehensive. There are 14 concepts that would have to come together, if you want, to be able to understand and make it work. So your brain is one of them, but all of the issues around our egos and our expectation of our place in the world. Two of the big illusions of the modern world, in my view, are the illusion of knowledge and the illusion of control, and how hard we strive to defend our knowledge and to exert control in the world, the illusion of time, and so on. So it's not just your brain, it's so much more, which is what I call the 6 grand illusions, the 7 blind spots, right? So the 6 grand illusions and the 7 blind spots are there to distract your happiness equation, not only your thoughts is one of them, okay? And I think the comprehensiveness of this in what I call the 6-7-5 model is what makes it more like the modern world, if you want. Bad answer? Tell me what you think.
Albert Ellis had a very comprehensive list of the fallacies of logical thinking, and in all due respect, I think your work is very similar to it, and it's the work that those of us who are cognitively
I can only say I'm honored that it is. Yeah, I'm an engineer. The language is very different, though. I think you should give that a chance.
I haven't read the book, but I just actually heard of you yesterday. But I seem to observe a distinction. I don't know if you've mentioned it, but it seems that there can be, that people can be taught this and see it, but then there's also a recognition and appreciation that's experience dependent. And that seems to really, it's like two sides of the coin.
Of course.
Could you speak on that at all?
Yeah. So there are two sides to my approach. One side is I feel that in our modern world we got so used to top 5 lists and to pills, okay? That most people will want to read a book or want an answer that basically says, just tell me 5 things to do very quickly, and when I do them, something happens, right? Or just prescribe a quick fix, right? I avoid that completely. I tend to believe that if you know what's wrong, you can fix it your own way, right? And perhaps again that's a bit of an engineer's approach to things. If you know what's wrong with the machine, you can fix the machine yourself. So my task, just like I do at Google X, is to make the impossible sometimes feel easy, right? If you start by saying self-driving cars, that's impossible. That's never going to happen. No one's going to try it, right? But when they try it and they work on it, maybe sometimes months later, maybe sometimes years later, it becomes doable, right? And I know that sometimes when I say, okay, you can manage your brain in a presentation, so you can manage your brain when you lose your son, the analogy is not even there. It's not even similar, right? But surprise, surprise. If you practice the techniques of, managing your brain for a while, if you practice the technique of giving up control for a while, again, ancient science called detachment in the Hindu religion, right? And so on. If you practice those things, surprisingly, they become like second nature. So while at the beginning, I can guarantee you, first you will be shocked at some of what the modern world has taught you, okay? Second, you will go like, okay, let me try to practice this like, quitting smoking or going on a diet for a week and then giving up. And then it starts to become a practice. And the more, you practice it, the more real it becomes. And it's not a secret that one of the studies where I talk about your, the parts of your brain that do different things, if people meditate long enough, they can almost shut that part of their brain, at least for a short while.
And I would call them depressed, are using drugs like Prozac and other mood enhancers, often prescribed by doctors. What do you think of that as the solution to unhappiness?
I think that is above my experience level. The antidepressant industry is going to be $16.8 billion in the year 2020. It's very significant, okay? Is it working? It could be. Is it not? I don't know, honestly. That's not my view. All I know is that at my lowest point, I elected not to go that path, okay? At least I elected to give myself a chance to try and do it, to fix the problem, for a very interesting reason, as a matter of fact. As a young child, I was diagnosed with, what do you call it, when you have spasms? Epilepsy, right? And, about age 13 or so, the recommendation was that I go on a drug for a lifetime. And my parents said, maybe you should just give it another chance, right? And it worked, surprisingly. So maybe part of my programming was that there could be other ways. Maybe there could, but definitely don't take my advice on this. I'm not a professional at all.
So I understand how I can use this to help me be less upset that my son and grandsons and my daughter-in-law live in San Francisco.
It's a wonderful place.
Yeah. But I know I live in this progressive political bubble right now where I'm trying to come to committed acceptance, but I wonder if you can talk, or if you've thought about, or if it's even fair to ask you, how those of us who are seeing things that we really can have no control over can come to some kind of acceptance. I mean, I'm not going to be thrown out of this country, but you know, millions of people could be, and that eats at me. That concerns me, and I just wonder if you thought about happiness in that larger sense.
Once again, it's definitely not my right to comment on American politics. I will, however, say that there is two sides to this debate, surprisingly, not one. So while many people will believe that their side is the dominant side, you know, there are people who support the president and others that don't support the decisions and so on, right? The interesting side of all of this is this. You are given, in reality, two choices, not one. One is to be unhappy and do something about it. And the other is not to be unhappy and do something about it, okay? These are really the two logical choices you have. Of course, you can choose not to do something about it, but I wonder if anyone here would not engage. The difference between them is, in scenario one, right, if you're unhappy and doing something about it, it's just taking away of your energy and not improving your performance in any way, right? The truth is, you realize that something's wrong, you do the best you can, right? The rest of the world is so much bigger than sometimes you or me, and what matters is that you've done the best you can. Now, I would surprisingly say, imagine if the current debates were engaged in a way where it was focused on the topics and less on the emotions. Wouldn't this be a better way to get it solved? I know sometimes it's very hard, I know. I mean, you know, sometimes some of the comments on either side are just, right, unmanageable. You just don't accept them, okay? But so what? If the action is what matters, if getting to the result is what matters, the only difference between choice A and choice B is you're going to be unhappy, okay? Make a choice.
I'm wondering how how your research has been received at Google. And then I'm also wondering how what you've learned in everything that you've read and in the process of writing this book, how that impacts, I guess, how your team dynamics and how you and your management style and your values with regard to work.
So I've been honored to write this book in a very unusual way. I wrote this book much more as a software developer, if you want. So I had a beta version of the book that I posted online on Google Docs at the time, and I had 500 early readers from across the world, people I didn't know, who would walk into the document and edit it themselves, right? They would literally go and say, I don't like this sentence, I would like to see it another way. And then you would get 60 or 70 comments on the margin of people arguing it between them and agreeing how they want to read it, okay? Offering research and offering, you know, comments, and it was an incredible experience. When we had version 3 of the book, which was done through that process, I then went on to talk about the content publicly and refine the message further through that, okay? Part of that public speaking was teaching the concepts of Solve for Happy in a 2.5-day course at Google, which we've done 5-6 times so far with luckily more than 90% satisfaction rate. So 90% would say that they get that language and that it changed their life. But more importantly, it was not only changing their life, it was also changing the content, which was really, 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 important for me. So it's been very well received. I've done that with other major organizations as well. The link to work, however, is the part I'm trying to avoid a little bit. Okay, not avoid in terms of not talking about it, but I don't want this to be another happy at work concept. Okay, because I don't see the difference between happy at work and happy in life. Okay, I think most organizations today realize that happy employees will be 12% more productive than unhappy employees. But if you're unhappy about your boyfriend and you go to work, you're still 12% less productive. Okay, so the interesting thing is, we want an environment where people are allowed to be happy, where people are allowed to introspect and find what makes them unhappy and remove that. At work, there are lots of examples. Okay, in specific, if happiness is about events versus expectations, then setting proper expectations in an objective way, setting key results to be measured and so on is very, very useful, because then the expectations are clear for everybody. There is no miscommunication there. There is that whole approach to committed acceptance is one of probably what I think has been one of my biggest reasons for success in life. When you're trying to sell or create a business around, let's say, selling glasses, it's reasonably predictable, okay? But when you're selling Project Loon, that's a very, very different concept, right? And it doesn't, you don't walk into the first client and the first client will say, yeah, we've been waiting for you for 6 years for that thing we've never heard about before, right? So you get setbacks, right? And committed acceptance is all about, can I accept the world for what it is? As I always tell my team, chill, and then go back at it and try again, right? And while sometimes you would think that this would get less results, the truth is it gets a much more motivated, much more empowered, and much more capable team. They go back at it and they do better and better and better. So there are many things that you can take from the concepts of what makes us happy in life and make that your happiness at work. But trust me, work is just a simulated environment, okay? The truth is you want to find that happiness inside you, even if your boss is a little annoying, okay? Your boss will be annoying every now and then. That's why they're the boss, right? So can you take that as the truth? Can you fix your expectation? Can you, engage with it in a way that maybe, makes you more successful as it makes you more happy?
I have 2 questions for you. The first is related to your distinction between pain and suffering and that incessant thought. And it sounds very simple when you say, I am, therefore my brain thinks, or turn that thought off, that incessant thought. I'm curious if you have any tips for people, for those of us who that is that constant voice and trying to silence that so you can move on. That's one. The second question is with regard to your goal of making 10 million people happy. What happens when you achieve that? What happens then?
Thank you for your confidence. So first of all, the way our brain. So understand, your brain is not bad. It has your best interest in mind, okay? The challenge is something I call the suffering cycle. And the suffering cycle is this. Your brain will see something wrong. It will generate a thought like, I was rude to Tracey, that's horrible, right? And that thought will almost have a survival impact on me. It's like, do something about it. So that feeling of unease is just my trigger to prioritize that and do something about it. And the problem we have is inaction. We don't do anything about it. So your brain goes like, hey, we really need to talk about this. And so it brings up the thought again, right? And you get the feeling again, and then you don't do anything about it. That suffering cycle of thought, suffering, inaction, thought, suffering, inaction continues endlessly, right? And there are many practical tips you can overcome, right? And some of them are anchored in science, of course, right? Some of them are anchored in meditation and mindfulness and all of that. I try to do it the way I know how to do things in business. I can either take action, by the way, right? And when I take action, what happens is I'm moving the incessant thought from that midline area of my brain to my right-hand side of the brain and really moving into the experiential part of my thinking, right? So I'm engaging in taking an action, even by the way, if it's a wrong action. Just by taking the action, you will find that you're thinking less incessantly. And that will make you a lot more peaceful, if you want, and will hopefully improve your ability to solve the problem. That's number one. Number two, of course, is you can turn it into problem solving. You can simply tell yourself, okay, brain, I get it. You were rude to her. What are we going to do about it? And then your brain will go like, well, I have an idea. Let's call her, right? That concept of, that simple process of solving the problem, okay, actually moves you away from the incessant thought to this side of your brain, right? There are, however, things that you can do nothing about, that you cannot solve, right? And often I take those into two extremes. One extreme is to ask myself, is it even true? Is what I'm saying to myself even true? Is it relevant? Is it important enough to cause me this suffering? Because sometimes the easiest way to solve a problem is to say, hey, you know what? Yeah, I was a little annoying with that Uber driver. I really was very rude. Or maybe a taxi driver, Uber, you can call him actually. But I was a little rude with that taxi driver. I can torture myself for the rest of my life. I will never see this guy again. I am so sorry. I am so sorry, but I can do nothing about it, right? So if you actually get to that point, you get your brain to rest. It's like, you know what? I know it was bad, but there is nothing I can do to fix it. Then you go to that committed acceptance, okay? And suddenly you go like, I accepted, I'm committed, at least next time I will never be rude even if the driver annoys me, right? And again, to answer you, to go back to your comment, I make it look easy. Yeah, it's not easy at all. Neither was watching a 2 hours presentation when you just came out of university, right? It takes practice to tell yourself, my absolute number one priority, brain, is not to survive because there are not many tigers around here, okay? And it's not to succeed, by the way, because success doesn't always make me happy. My number one priority is to be happy, and with that I will succeed and survive. When you make that priority correctly, okay, then you'll start to tell yourself, just like when we go on a diet, I so want that cheesecake, but I'm not gonna eat it, okay? It really is sometimes that simple.
Thank you. It's fascinating that you've used your engineering aptitude to try to solve for happy, especially given that you're at Google X. Do you think that you could use that same approach to solving for some other things, for example, doing away with hatred?
Yeah, I wish. I wish. If we find the algorithm for it, maybe we could. There is, there definitely, you'll be surprised. So I told you at X we try to solve big problems that affect the lives of billions of people. You'll be surprised how many there are out there. It's incredible, really. We get an idea like almost every hour. There are so many, okay? And we somehow, I think we again, part of the modern world illusion, we've learned to focus on our little world rather than the bigger parts of the world. Hatred is a huge issue in our world. There is so much friction, so much violence. There is so much poverty. There is so much hunger. There is 786 million people in our world without access to clean water. Okay? There is more than 30 million people in our world that are slaves. Can you imagine that? Slaves, like in captivity, being used, okay? And yeah, our world is full of problems. I think if each of us try to take, an attempt to make a difference, it would probably work, right? But I don't know if I would say my calling, my mission, what I'm trying to do now is this one, okay? I don't know why, but I tend to believe, like so many wise people have said before, that your life's purpose is to be happy. If you tune your guitar and you hit that fork, and it will always vibrate in the key of E. If each of us has that natural resonance somehow, and if you find that natural resonance and just play to it for the rest of your life, you're probably going to have a bigger impact on the world. So, yeah, I mean, wish me luck with 10 million people happy. By the way, to answer your second question, what would happen after 10 million people? What would happen if we don't get 10 million people is the interesting question, right? And truly, just so that you understand, I'm totally realistic about this. If I got 2 people in this audience to be happy, that's it. It worked, right? It doesn't have to be 10 million. 10 million is just the inspirational businessman target so that I run harder. That's it, okay? But if it's 2, if it's 20, if it's 10 million, if it's 20 million, if it's 100 million, who cares, right? Now, going back to your point, I'm gonna run for this one. And I'm sure everyone in this audience has the expertise in others. Maybe we should try to take the same approach, because truly our world is full of problems.
The book is called Solve for Happy. I have to tell you, Mo, I have found it to be profoundly impactful in my life. I believe that all of you will too. If you have not already read the book, I encourage you to read it and enjoy it. And join me in thanking Mo for being with us tonight.